in Genesis 2:15 and 16, the language of humanity being created, both man and woman, is that we're made in the likeness and image of God. These two phrases, likeness and image, are rooted in two Hebrew words, shalem and demut, and they were used almost exclusively of children of royalty. Now, here's the question. What have Adam and Eve, what have you and I done to earn such a title? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is a gift that has been bestowed upon us. And so, like, I kind of joke about it. I'm like, if you're a child of God, you kind of have the right to walk with just a little bit of swag. Like you can walk around with just a little bit of swagger. Now, not because of who you are, but because of who Dad is.
Yeah. I believe every single person has a ministry. Ministry isn't just for preachers, and it's not just for pastors. It's the way you shine the light that God gave you through His Spirit in all spaces that He's trusted you to walk. That means you on your college campus. That means you at your corporate job. That means you in high school. That means you with your friends at the bar or the restaurant. That means you wherever you are. You have the responsibility to shine God's light in that space, and you get the chance to. Friend, you are beautiful, you are worthy, and you are made to shine. Welcome back to another episode of the Made to Shine show. As you just heard in that introduction, we are in for such a treat. It's like super early in the morning, and I'm so excited. I can't stop smiling because we have someone that I've been looking at his content, learning from him from afar for so long, and so excited for you guys to get to learn from him from up close today. We have Joel Muddamalle on us with us today. Joel, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, Annie, I'm so excited. This is so much fun, and so excited for the conversation we're about to have.
Me too. And I mean, you have this new book out, and you have all of these things you're doing with your YouTube content and your channel. And we were just talking about what you're doing with something upcoming with your book. And so super excited to talk about that. But I just want to remind everybody, like, the mission of this show is to remind every single person you have a ministry. Ministry isn't just for pastors and preachers. It's the way that you take God's light that He put in your heart through His Spirit, and you shine it and love it on all the people He's trusted you with in your path, whether that's at your high school campus, your college campus, with your family at the dinner table, with your friends on a Thursday night. And Joel, what I really wanted you on the show is because, yes, you're doing all these amazing things with ministry. I mean, you're brilliant, just so smart with all the 1,000 doctorate things you have before your name. But I think also what's so impressive and amazing is you're a dad and you're a husband, and you do so many things that you shine God's light through in like all factors of your life. And so really excited to have you on the show, shine some light to these younger girls tuning in. But before we do, got to kick this off the way I kick off every single show, which is, Joel, what is your favorite quote and why?
Oh, gosh. I think my favorite quote is it's by a theologian. The guy's name is G.K. Beale, and he's a biblical theologian, and he's got this incredible quote, and the quote is, what we revere, we reflect either to our ruin or our restoration. So what we revere, so the thing that we gaze after, the thing that we love, the thing that we long after. Yeah. So whatever we revere, we're going to reflect.
Wow.
And that thing that we reflect is either going to produce restoration in our lives, it's going to be beautiful, or it's going to produce ruin in our lives. And so what Beale is trying to really get us to question is, what is that thing that we love the most? What is that thing that we pursue the most? Because, and then I kind of have my own quote that I've played off of it, but the things that we long after, we desire, and then we try to take hold of it, right? But the thing is, whatever we're trying to take hold of actually is in fact taking hold of us. And so we have to be really careful that we're not trying to take hold of things that are destructive towards us, but we're actually like trying to seek after and take hold of the things of God and realize, well, actually God's the one who's taken hold of us. And so
Mhm.
it's one of my favorite quotes because it plays out in so many different ways in life, and it's always asking me to go back and consider, what is the object of my true affection? Like, what do I really love? Who do I really love? And what's it producing in me? What's it producing in my life? Because if I say I love Jesus, and yet the production of my life is ruin, there's
Mhm.
chaos and there's confusion, and I'm being mean and short with my wife or angry with my kids, it actually calls into question, well, how am I doing on actually really loving Jesus? Because if I
Yeah.
really love Jesus, then those things ought to be slowly but surely just reflecting more of his compassion and love. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's so good. It makes me think about too someone um I was actually speaking with someone the other day about just you worry about what you worship or you
Mm-hmm.
worship what you worry about. So if you
Mm-hmm.
think about all the things in your life that you wake up, what's the first thing on your mind? Like is it that hard conversation you're going to have? Is it the bajillion to-do list items you have to do for your kids or your friends or your boyfriend, girlfriend, your spouse? Like what that's what you're worshiping.
Yep.
And I think what you said is so true. It's like we and everyone tuning in for the most part, like they know of Jesus. It's a faith-based podcast, but I think that's a good litmus test as to like how much do you really know him? And I think too, it's kind of coining the question, is Jesus the Lord over your entire life or just parts
Mm-hmm.
of it?
Yeah.
Because we're really good as a world kind of boxing God into certain parts of our life and saying, yes, God, yes, if you're really good at giving, it's like maybe he's the Lord over your money, but is he the Lord over your sexuality? Is he the
Yeah.
Lord over your friendships? And so
Yeah.
I think it's so powerful. And you just wrote a book called The Hidden Peace. And I
Yeah.
think everything you were just saying, that's the goal, right? Not just to reflect, but to absorb peace.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious for you, when I think about the world we live in right now, it's a social media driven age, right? You have kids, like you're seeing it grow up,
Oh yeah.
you've seen it kind of create. And I feel like we with as young people associate celebration with connection. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to be forgotten about, which is why social media just plagues to that part of us that wants to be known and seen and heard with this humility factor, because you talk so much about humility in The Hidden Peace, why is it in our best interest? Like, let's start there. Like with this book, why you
Yeah.
wrote it, why it emphasizes on humility, and why people. I think when we think about humility, we think about it as this thing. It's like taking out the trash. We have to
Yeah.
do it, but we don't. It's not in our best interest to do it.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, Annie. I think that we live in such an interesting society because, like, even like let's start with the social media thing. I think that we live in the most connected time of human existence ever. Like
Mhm.
where we have the potential and the ability to connect with family members that are in different states, potentially different countries. We can make friends with people in different countries and be in connection with them consistently, all because of this thing called social media. I mean, I'm old enough where I remember when there's this thing called AOL Instant Messenger. I don't know, like and it was wild, y'all. Like you actually had to dial in, and there'd be like these sounds, and you'd have to wait to connect to the internet, and you'd have these away messages, and like it was how cool you were was based on how cool your away message was. So you could be like super passive aggressive and be like, oh, I'm going through a really hard breakup right now, and you'd put like a dashboard confessional like lyric or something up there. Like I'm just giving you like
That's
context
awesome.
for and so this was like social media. This was kind of like
Yeah.
how it was back in the day. And now you don't even have an away message because you're always there. Like you're
Mhm.
never not there. And what's fascinating to me is in a world that is more connected than ever, all the stats and all the research are overwhelmingly showing that this generation is the most disconnected than ever before, that they are longing for relationship more than ever before. They are the loneliest generation than ever before. And along with that comes a lot of anxiety, comes a lot of confusion. There's a lot of comparison, like, well, what are they doing? What are they doing? Well, how come my life doesn't look like that? And there's a lot of, honestly, like we call it fronting. Like there's a lot of presenting of the good life, when
Yeah.
in reality we get to pick and choose what we post. We get to put filters on whatever we want to filter,
Mhm.
And so, as I was kind of doing a lot of research, I spent over 1,000 hours studying humility in the Bible. And the thing that I was shocked about is there's this ancient virtue And Paul consistently is like, put on humility, clothe yourself in humility. And the Greek word for humility is tapienos. And in that time, in that phrase, in the Greco-Roman world, this word was almost universally rejected as negative. It wasn't something anybody celebrated. It wasn't any, like, people weren't getting tattoos with humility. Like it was just wasn't happening. And then it begs us to ask the question, well, why would Paul tell these churches in Corinth and Ephesus and Galatia, like, why would he tell them, like, put on humility, clothe yourself in humility? And it's like, well, because that's what Jesus did. This is what Philippians 2:8-9 says, that Jesus humbled himself, that he took on humanity, therefore he was exalted. And so it's like, why pursue humility? Well, because humility gives us the gift of self-awareness. Like in a world that's trying to actually rob us of our self-awareness, it's trying to over-project or under-project who we are. You either make yourself seem more powerful than we actually are, or live like a victim and be like, oh man, like I'm just getting stepped on and walked all over all the time. What humility does for us is it actually regains right awareness. And so with the power of self-awareness, we can take an honest look at ourselves. And we can be like, you know what? God has wired me in such an incredible way. I'm gifted as a communicator. I'm gifted with a brilliant mind. I'm gifted to connect. Like here are all these areas of giftings, right? And humility goes, and I've got some areas of limitations. And I've got some weaknesses. And I need other people. Like, I can't do this whole thing on my own. Like, I'm actually not in control of anything. Like, God is totally in control. And so it's like, is it possible to have peace in this life? And I think we're kind of told, like, oh yeah, peace is only possible if all the conditions line up. If A plus B equals C, then you can have peace. Or peace is this momentary feeling, uniquely, and I would argue theologically and biblically exclusively for the follower of Jesus. Jesus offers us a type of peace that is not conditioned based on things going right. He offers us a peace in the very midst of all the hurtful and the heartache that we have to walk through. And the means by which, like the pathway to experience this peace, is reclaiming this ancient virtue of humility and really following the life of Jesus in the same way that Jesus humbled himself and experienced, life in its fullest. Therefore, Christ exalted him. If all the things of Jesus are going to be true of us, then yeah, humility is a worthwhile pursuit, because the end of humility, the pathway that humility will take us to, is actually exaltation from God. And it's really important that I like clear on that part. Is it's not self-exaltation. It's not me exalting myself. It's being humble and experiencing the awe of God, and then watching like, oh my gosh, God's the one who does the exalting. And even in that, we're humbled.
That is what I love. You mentioned a couple things there that I think are so powerful. What K-Love Radio?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, so love me some K-Love. And they were saying the other day the power of switching a conjunction in a phrase we typically say all the time, like life is hard, but God is good.
Right.
I even I also like my day was really hard, but God did this, or I saw this, and I think it was Lori, I'm not sure, but she said switch but to and. Life is hard and God is good, because sometimes the but negates the hard. And the and shows that like God is good even in the hard. And there was an illustration one time of peace that I loved. It's like so many of us think of peace as beach, drink with a tropical umbrella in it, you know what I mean? Like something strawberry on the side. But really peace looks like think of and they show this picture of this massive storm, and there was this little dove perched in the cliff of the rock, and it was protected from the storm. Things are crazy, but there's calm. There's something in the middle of that. And something you mentioned too that I thought was so good is recognizing it's okay to recognize you're good at things. It's okay to recognize God gave you gifts. I think sometimes we think humility is belittling yourself, not letting yourself recognize anything good about you, and somehow that honors God, just to keep putting yourself down. And so I want you to speak to really what it is and what it isn't, because I think that people take that and think, okay, I can't think good of myself ever. I also want you to speak to, I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. Do you do the Enneagram?
Oh yeah, I'm a 3 too. I'm a 3-wing 2.
3-wing 2.
So I get it.
Same.
Yep.
So 3-wing 2. I think about my 3-wing twos out there, and they go to the point of, they want to achieve. So they're like, you know what, Joel? I hear you. I am going to achieve the crap out of humility. I am going to go for it. So is humility something that we do to get, or how do we just receive it if not?
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot there. So let me start
Yeah.
first with what is humility.
Yep.
So you might have heard the famous saying, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking of yourself less often.
Yeah.
And this is historically attributed to C.S. Lewis. There's some debate of whether or not C.S. Lewis actually said it, but historically attributed to Lewis. And Annie, very dangerous ever to disagree with C.S. Lewis. So I'm not going to necessarily disagree with Lewis, but I'm going to suggest that humility, biblical humility, has a starting spot, and the starting spot is not with ourselves. So again, we live in a world that is self-absorbed. We're self-obsessed, right? And I kind of call it the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I. We filter everything through me, myself, and I. And so what humility is it moves us away from self-centeredness into self-awareness. And what does self-awareness do? So this is what humility is. Humility is first and foremost an awareness of who God is. So if I know who God is, then I can know who I am. And if I know who God is, and I actually know who I am, I now know how to relate to other people. And the order matters. So notice what happens. First, I know who God is. So I have peace with God. That actually has to preface everything. If I have peace with God, then God grants me that peace internally that I can have, that can't be robbed from me, right? Like that is something that is a gift that God gives me. So I have peace with God. I've got peace with myself. Now I'm perfectly positioned and equipped to pursue peace with other image bearers of God. And so this movement of what humility is, it's self-awareness so that it helps me rightly see who I am in relationship to everything else around me. What is humility and what is it not? I've thought of humility as a protection, a prevention, and a preservation. So humility protects us from thinking too low of ourselves. Because Annie, if we think too low of ourselves, inevitably we're going to get walked all over. In Genesis 2:15 and 16, the language of humanity being created, both man and woman, is that we're made in the likeness and image of God. These two phrases, likeness and image, are rooted in two Hebrew words, shalem and demut, and they were used almost exclusively of children of royalty. Now, here's the question. What have Adam and Eve, what have you and I done to earn such a title? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is a gift that has been bestowed upon us. And so, like, I kind of joke about it. I'm like, if you're a child of God, you kind of have the right to walk with just a little bit of swag. Like you can walk around with just a little bit of swagger. Now, not because of who you are, but because of who Dad is.
Yeah.
So like at church,
Yeah.
when I preach on a Sunday, I've got 4 kids, 3 boys and a little girl, and the boys, are older now, 12, 10, and 9, and but my little girl, when I'm preaching, man, MJ at 4 years old, she walks that church like she owns that bad boy. She'll walk on the stage, she'll do whatever she wants, and she'll be like, "Oh, that's my dad. Like my dad was just up there." Like and there's this innocent confidence about her. And so I think of, okay, humility is this protection because it reminds us of who we are. But humility is also a prevention. Humility prevents us from thinking too much of ourselves. Because if we think too much of ourselves, inevitably we will be the ones who are walking all over other people. And then humility is a preservation. And so, like, if you're feeling unsafe today, if you're just like worried, like, man, when is the rug going to get pulled out underneath me and things are going to start falling all around me, right? And you've got this anxiety driven life and you're just worried. There's no safer place to be than in the faithful, nail-pierced hands of Jesus himself.
Wow.
Humility is a preservation. It keeps us in the hands of Jesus. It keeps us firmly in his grasp. And so this is what humility is. Now, the other fascinating thing is, like, our society seems to really disparage humility. People talk about it. It's like, I don't want anything to do with it. But the amazing thing too, and you can just do this, like pay attention to sports broadcasters or movie stars and actors and actresses and kind of the way that they talk and all this other stuff. When they experience humility, they love it.
Mm.
right? So conceptually, like when you talk about humility, it feels kind of like repulsive, almost like, oh no, I don't want that because that's weakness, that's like that I'm going to get stepped all over, that kind of mentality. But when somebody in real life experiences true humility, it's magnetic. You love it, you long for it, you want to emulate that. And so this is what I think is one of the deceptions of the enemy, that he wants us to, in our brains, conceptually reject it, because he knows that when we embrace it, we're going to love it, and when we love it, we're actually going to live the life of Jesus, and the enemy does not
Mm.
want us to live the life of Jesus. And so humility is the path for us to live the way that Jesus lived.
That is, I've never heard like what you said about preservation. I've That speaks so much to me, because I was even telling someone the other day, I'm someone, I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic, but I feel like I struggle. I'm paranoid. Like I'm always like you said, when's the rug going to be pulled out of me? And when life there that in the Bible, when it talks about like God draws near to the brokenhearted,
Mm-hmm.
in the Psalms, when I go through seasons of life where there's nothing I'm brokenhearted about, I'm afraid God's not near to me. And I'm like, well, when's the next ball going to drop? And it's
Right.
almost hard for me to experience the good times, because I'm like, they're going to end. So I need to
Yep.
be on edge. I need to be on my guard. And so I love that you said that, because that speaks to me specifically. I think what you also said about like the protection, it goes to the point of it's there to protect us from also thinking too low of ourselves, because I think
Mm-hmm.
some of us, we kind of go on two sides. For me, I'm definitely on the side of, I can give you like 10 things that I did wrong this morning already, and it's like super early. It's hard for me to think, okay, I did this well, I did that well. It's hard for me to do that. When you humble yourself before God and know anything good in you came from God, you can celebrate or appreciate that appropriately. And so I
Yeah.
love that you speak to that too. And I think when you go back to humility, you talk about the spiraling of your thoughts, like in a lot of your Instagram videos, like,
Yeah.
and I thought about too, what are my thoughts specifically? What do I typically spiral about? And it's always somehow concerned around what others think of me, or
Yeah.
is what I'm doing good enough, or
Yeah.
where am I going to fall short? And I want you to speak too about the correlation between like humility and also appreciating times you do fall short, appreciating failure, because you talk about how those are necessary things for our growth. I think we sometimes veer away from those, like we're allergic to them, because we
Yeah.
don't want something that actually tests where our limits are,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't want to experience a humbling kind of circumstance. So talk to me about the importance of those situations, and when it's good for your humility to be tested.
Yeah, so there's an incredible little tiny book by J.I. Packer, brilliant theologian, and the title of his book is simply "Weakness is the Way." Weakness is the way,
Mm.
and I love it. And I quote Packer in my book quite a bit, because what Packer does for us is he reminds us that that weakness is in fact the very place that you and I can experience the infinite power and strength and ability of God. And so when we run away from and when we try to reject weakness in our lives, it's actually a form of idolatry and pride. We're trying to exercise something that was not ours ever to exercise. We're trying to believe something about us, which is actually just simply untrue. And so instead of trying to reject weakness, instead of trying to run from our limits, one of the greatest gifts that humility does for us is it helps us accept our limits and our limitations. It helps us see our weaknesses for what they are. There's this incredible story about Jacob in Genesis, and Jacob wrestles with God, and the text is so specific. The text says at the end of this battle, this wrestling match, Jacob demands for God to bless him, and then halfway through, like God like touches his hip, dislocates his hip. It's kind of wild, and then God finally is like, "All right, I'll bless you," and then He blesses him, and then the text says that Jacob limps away. He limped away to Peniel. And every indication of the text is he has that limp for the rest of his life. And the question I kind of have when I read that text is I'm like, okay, Jacob realizes he's wrestling with Yahweh. Like he's wrestling with the creator of the universe. The same God who touched his hip to dislocate his hip why didn't Jacob just be like, hey, God, like, by the way, before you head out, you mind touching my hip again and healing this bad
Yeah.
boy? Like,
Yeah.
because like to have a dislocated hip and a limb for the rest of Jacob's life, that's going to be devastation. He lived in the ancient Near Eastern world. Homeboy had to walk everywhere, even
Mhm.
getting on horses and carts. I mean, think of how painful that would have been. And so this limp would have been an external evidence of weakness for the world around and an internal evidence of weakness that Jacob. And so why does he not? And why doesn't God offer? Here's why. I actually think that the weakness, the limp, wasn't evidence of God's displeasure in Jacob's life. It was actually going to be a reminder of God's grace for the rest of Jacob's life. Because Jacob would go and he would remember that limp and he would be that go like, oh, that's the place where God met me. That's the place where I was blessed, you know?
Oh,
And so, yeah, I think that that weakness is something that if we can learn to accept our weaknesses and to just own our limits and allow that to be the pivotal point where we turn to God, we can actually see how God uses our very weaknesses as a means of grace and also a
yeah.
way for him to show his might and strength inside of the world. This is what Paul talks about. Like, of all things I'm going to boast about, I'll just boast about my weaknesses even more.
That is so good. I'm watching this documentary right now. It's on Netflix if anyone's curious, but it's on Moses. Because for me, like I love seeing the Bible, like love the chosen. I love just seeing it in action. And so I was watching this documentary on Moses last night, and I was thinking the same thing. A question my dad, who gosh, if anyone thinks I ask deep questions, they should meet my father. He's like,
Mm,
we're sitting at the dinner table. I'm one of four. I have two sisters and a brother. So we're flipped from your family. Like my brother's
yep.
the youngest.
Yep.
And and he'll just be like, what does it mean to be blessed? Like he
Hmm.
just shoots these questions that could go 1,000 hours.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about that last night. And with Moses, it's like, okay, he was separated his family, but then he wasn't a very good speaker and he was reunited with his brother, and his brother Aaron was the spokesperson for him. And
Yep.
you could think like the fact God could have made him a great speaker to go and speak to Pharaoh, but he didn't. And if anything, that was probably a reminder for Moses of God's grace. Like he reunited Moses with his family. And I think going back to what it means to be blessed, I also think about Job.
Oh yeah.
Job, when he lost everything, but he saw God and recognized God was really all he needed. Even in Isaiah talks about himself, and then he, experiences God, and it's like everything switched is to God. It's like, what
Hmm.
does it mean to be blessed? Maybe it's losing everything and recognizing God is everything that you need.
Yeah, that's so good.
And so I think that's so powerful. And I think too, when you go back to exactly what you said. You mentioned this previously about like something that the enemy does and kind of influences us today. And initially, how I found you is you were on a podcast with Jenny Allen and talking
Hmm.
about the enemy in today's world. And I was
Yeah.
like, gosh, because I had just come fresh out of a conversation with someone that very, lovingly said to me, Annie, you're not taking the enemy seriously enough. Like,
Mm,
are you really taking the enemy seriously enough in your life?
mhm.
And I think there's so many of us that look to God and believe in God, but we don't take the enemy seriously. It's almost this frou-frou thing that I feel like young people we missed talking about. And
Yeah.
so I'm for Joel to kind of for the little bit of our time together, I really want to talk about that and like where
Hmm.
you see in the world today, kind of why you don't think people are taking the enemy seriously enough, and kind of where the enemy's biggest tactics are you think in this generation coming up that would be the first step for us to recognize him in our everyday.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I wish we had another hour to talk about this. This could be a whole
Yeah.
episode on its own. I would say, one of the things that the enemy is consistently doing, why we don't see his work as clearly at times, is because he's sneaky, man. He's crafty. In fact, that for the phrase that the serpent was crafty, the Hebrew word is a room. I mean,
Mm.
it's treacherous. The imagery is the imagery of someone who sets a trap and it's hidden and you're just waiting to get caught in it, and so one of the ways that the enemy does this is not necessarily by being like, this is straight up evil, go do it, um C.S. Lewis refers to this as the moral compass. Like, we all kind of know what right and wrong is. Like, we all kind of be like, oh yeah, that's good, and no, that is totally evil. See, I don't even think that the enemy has to play in those areas, because we've got this moral compass. People who are depraved, who are just bent on self-destruction, they're going to go after those things anyways. The enemy doesn't have to waste his time in those spaces. But what is the enemy doing? Actually, what I think the enemy is spending more of his time, and this is why it's so crafty and sneaky, and why we don't see it as much, is because he's taking really good things and trying to turn them into ultimate God things in our lives. So he's trying to separate the creation and creator distinction. And so it's like, if God has given us good gifts, and the enemy can separate the giver of the gift from the gift itself and cause you and I to be enamored by that gift, then we turn that gift into God. This is like circling all the way back to that G.K. Beale quote: "What we revere, we will reflect, either to our ruin or to our restoration." And so what he's doing is saying, hey, 80% of this is good, and then he's going to compromise 20% of it. And if he compromises 20% of it, that fundamentally disrupts and causes the 80% to also be evil as well. And this is where our generation and this next generation behind me, I mean, this is what is so sneaky. And so the way that I think this works out is actually an ancient tactic that the enemy presented all the way back in the Garden of Eden with Eve and Adam. And here's what it is. And I actually ended up writing about it in my book. I have the entire origin story of Lucifer that's actually told in two different passages in Ezekiel and Isaiah. And it's actually, in a way, shooting back all the way to Genesis 3. But what the serpent actually suggests is that you and I could experience curiosity without limits. And whenever we try to be curious without limits, it's going to create chaos in our lives. And so the fascinating thing is that God desires for humanity to be curious. Curiosity is a good thing, right? He gives Adam and Eve a task in Eden. He tells Adam to name all the animals. He tells Adam and Eve to guard, to shamar, to protect the Garden of Eden, to cultivate it. Like, these are all curious, creative acts that they're to do. And then God gives them limits. He gives them boundaries. And he says, and don't eat of this tree. You know? And what does the serpent do? He calls into question the goodness of God. He says, did God really say? Right? And so this is what the enemy is doing today. The enemy today is suggesting, be curious. Enjoy all of the benefits of curiosity and reject any limits, any boundaries. You be God. You do you, boo. That's the biggest lie. And the thought is that's going to give us the most freedom. Man, that's not going to free anybody. That will enslave you to the vices of the flesh. And if you're enslaved to the vices of the flesh, you know what you're going to be robbed of? Peace. You know what you're going to have instead? Anxiety and confusion and chaos and heartache, not just to yourself, but for those people that you do life with. And so the enemy absolutely is working in such deceptive ways today. We could just use a couple quick examples of this. Is God has given us, like last night I played basketball. I play basketball once a week. On Tuesday nights I hoop for about an hour and a half, and I love it. It's like the best thing for me, and it's a physical thing. I get exercise. A bunch of the guys that I hoop with, they're not Christians, so it's a great time for me just to hang out with the guys, all that kind of stuff. It's great. So the temptation is, and it's anxiety release for me, like I've got a full day, I hoop. Okay, cool. The temptation that the enemy can give to me is to say, Joel, you don't need to play basketball. You know what you can do is just go home, and in that cupboard, you've got that bottle of whiskey. Just take the edge off. Have one drink. Well, then one drink turns into two drinks. And then two drinks one night turns into two drinks 2 nights. And then 2 drinks 2 nights turns into a drink every night of the week. And then all of a sudden, you are exchanging something good, working out, exercising, walking, going, right? In order to relieve the stress that we do have stressful lives, but you're exchanging it for a counterfeit. And that counterfeit is not relieving stress. In this case, alcohol, it's actually numbing you to the reality of stress. Interesting. Again, I have this in my book. The Greek word narkeo That's where we get the term narcissist from. It comes from the Greek myth of Narcissus who looks at himself and gets obsessed with himself. That whole deal, So it's like narcissistic tendencies. Well, narkeo, it actually means to grow numb over time, to be suffocated over time. And so what the enemy is often doing, I don't think anybody just wakes up one day and goes, oh, today's the day I'm going to blow up my life, and I'm going to cause chaos in all my relationships, and I'm going to, ghost this. Like, I don't think that, you know what I think happens is I think it's one thought that was a curious thought, that we reject God's limits in that thought, and that thought turns into a spiral of downward thoughts that leads us into a place of numbing ourselves out that is absolutely devastating for us. And this is why I just go back to, why is humility so important? Humility is the gift of self-awareness, so that we can catch the enemy in his tactics, so we can see ourselves as we rightly are. So when our friends say, I'm concerned about you, like I'm worried about your life and where you are, instead of pride rising up and then creating justifications for all the reasons, we can say, I really need to consider that. And maybe I should be worried for myself as well, And so the sin of the enemy was curiosity without limits. And in Isaiah and Ezekiel, it says that he stared at the throne of God. And at one point in time, after staring at God's throne room, he thought, I want the throne for myself. You see, curiosity without limits is always chaotic. And this is the spiritual warfare that I think this next generation is going to be faced with. The world is screaming at you, be curious, and don't let anybody tell you what to do. Don't let anybody put limits on you. That's hatred. That's not hatred. The limits of God, the discipline of God, is not his hatred against you. It's his love for you to protect you from self-destruction.
Yeah. And it made me think of what you said earlier about almost like the order of operations, like putting God first, and then you learn about yourself, putting God first, and then you learn how to love other people. It's like, what are you curious about? What is the object of your curiosity?
Yes.
And is it God in his vastness and his beauty, or is it yourself in that place? Is it yourself in I think too, you mentioned like the great example of like hooping with your boys, and then that versus opening up the bottle of whiskey. I think too, like even in my life, I remember, so I ran in college, and it happened like, it's the compound effect. It doesn't start all at once, but running became this good thing that became the ultimate thing for me. I mean, there was a season in my life, it was like, if I didn't run 12 miles that day, I couldn't go to bed that night because I was so anxious and I felt like such a failure. And I think sometimes we're so quick to say like, oh, the enemy will take you down the road of drinking or sex or drugs, but like also good things that the world celebrates, like food. I mean, that's how eating disorders happen, or binge eating disorders happen, or exercise disorders happen, or even our ministry. Like you can be obsessed with ministry and get so focused on like how many baptisms were this week, or where did I speak this week, and it becomes a good thing, becomes the ultimate thing.
Yes.
And I'm curious, so we live in such a self-development obsessed world, like mindset matters. Refuse the negative thoughts, think about the positive thoughts. How do you know when it's the enemy versus just a thought? Like, are all negative thoughts, that being a very subjective kind of category there, are all negative thoughts from the enemy? Is it always from the enemy, or is it sometimes just your mindset? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. So I think I think that one thing, whenever I talk about spiritual warfare and I talk about the enemy, I always try to remind people that the framework of the Bible is not like the concept of yin and yang. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen that image of white and darkness and
like
light. Yeah. And that whole presentation is that there's an equal bad and an equal good, and they're in this ultimate tension, right? Who's going to win out? That's not the picture that the biblical narrative presents. The biblical narrative presents the king, and then the biblical narrative presents rebellion against the king. The king never ceases to be king. and that rebellion is taking place, but the rebellion is doomed to defeat. Like that's what happens at the cross, right? And so in that, the king himself is the only one who's limitless. So we could go through like the attributes of God. The God is omniscient, he's omnipresent, he's all-knowing, he's in all places at all times, right? Like these are exclusive things about God and God only. The enemy is not omniscient. The enemy is not all-knowing. It's not in all places at all times. The enemy is limited in time and space because the enemy himself and his evil henchmen and things, the supernatural, malevolent, evil spirits that are out there, these beings are created beings. So with that, I kind of want to always just say, okay, I think we have to be precise with our language, and I think that we have to be aware of these things because it actually gives us a bit of hope. Like, is Satan always after you? Well, Satan is one being that is limited to time and space, can only be in one place in anywhere, right? And so if that's the case, the probability of Satan personally attacking you is probably not high, Okay, with that being said, does spiritual warfare take place? Absolutely. Now, how does spiritual warfare take place? So one, absolutely, the fall has messed with us. In Genesis 3, I believe that the image of God is not broken, humanity is broken. And because humanity is broken, we don't think the way that we should think, we don't feel the way that we should feel, we don't do the things that we should do, Do we have dark thoughts? Absolutely. Do we experience things that we shouldn't experience? Absolutely. All those things are true. This is the whole idea of sanctification. And so there's a part of this that I want to attribute to just say, like, it's the fall. Like, it is the impact of sin that has messed up the entire world. And there's also dark powers at play. And I would argue that Paul's language, and this is the topic of my dissertation, Paul's language of powers, principalities, authorities throughout the New Testament, Colossians and Ephesians particularly, and Corinthians, are specific words and phrases to describe evil supernatural beings that are working in systems and structures. We have to remember that the enemy is very smart, and the enemy knows that they can't be in all places at all times. So what can they do? Well, they can work within systems and structures to cause systematic chaos in the world. There's a reason why pornography is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's a reason why opioid abuse and fentanyl addictions are skyrocketing. There's a reason why anxiety and depression is at a historic high, especially amongst teenagers right now. And so, the answer is just simply and we have to be aware that the enemy has a tactic and is working against God's people in order to derail us from God's mission and his vision for our lives. And so it's a both and for me. And also it's like, okay, the enemy's limited, can't be in all places at all times. And so we just need to be wise,
That's so good.
with what we do. And honestly, it's like, I think about the book of Daniel and something, it's so fascinating, Annie, for me. I can sit and I can like study books like all day. I love doing like Greek and Hebrew word studies. Like I'm like a nerd, like all the way through. What's really hard for me? To sit and pray for like 5 minutes.
Wow.
Like, it's really hard for me to pray. And what's fascinating to me is in the book of Daniel, the thing that triggers a series of supernatural events that brings relief to Daniel is prayer. I think it's Daniel 8. It's either 8, 9, or 10. It's one of those. I'm just pulling from my memory right now. But it says specifically that one of these princes, I think it's one of these heavenly beings that God sends out, says to Daniel, from the moment your words were heard, and it was routine for Daniel to pray. He says, and then we came. And so this is just a fascinating thought that how do we combat this? Like, how do we deal with supernatural spiritual warfare? One of the most overlooked but necessary ones is just prayer. Prayer is actually an act of spiritual warfare. And then you
Yeah.
look at Ephesians 6 and the whole armor of God, and our
Yeah.
fight isn't against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and authorities. Wait a minute, that's the language that Paul uses for these,
Mhm.
these very beings. And so, this is where humility. And you asked this before. You're like, well, is humility just like for the three? Is it just like a checklist that you move on from? I don't believe so. I think humility is not a checklist that we just check off and move on from. Humility is the soil of the Christian life that we
Wow.
live from.
Wow.
And when we live from that soil, we are given the eyes to see both earthly and spiritually.
Oh,
You
wow.
know, we can
Yeah.
see what's happening in our world, and we can also see what's happening in the unseen realm.
That is, and you think about, okay, so I was thinking about like the parable of the seed and the seed falling on good soil. It's like the seed, the word of God that falls on the good soil. The good soil is humility. And the last thing I really want to ask before, because we're already, I could talk to you for 6 hours about this. But the last thing I want to ask is just, you mentioned like, in order to cultivate that seed, you keep using the word aware. And I think
Mm-hmm.
about the word sensitivity, because you said the biggest tactic the enemy uses is like, it slowly but surely you numb out,
Yeah.
to the recognition. And so like, how is, because I think about the story of the prodigal son, like there's two people in that story. There's the one that did everything right, and then there's the one that did nothing right and came back and asked for forgiveness. I feel like as Christians, there's both of that in us. There's the part of us that thinks when we pray a lot and read our Bible, God should bless us. And whether we say that or not,
Right.
we should get the best parking spot at church. Or there's a part of us that knows when we're not doing right, and we're so grateful for his grace. But like, with all of that in us, how do you remain sensitive to what's going on through humility as a
Yeah.
believer?
Yeah. So I'm actually super excited right now because our ministry, Proverbs 31 Ministries, is actually doing my book as their book club. And so it's actually pretty awesome. The
Yeah.
website is, I can pull it up really quick. The website is circle31.org, and I'm actually leading one of the groups. And so this is going to be super fun. But the way that this has all been designed is actually to answer that very question that you just
Awesome.
asked. Like, how do we do this? Okay. The first thing is that the Christian life was never meant to be lived in isolation. Like, we were never meant to live this life alone.
Okay.
And so one of the tragedies that could take place is you try to take these principles, these thoughts, these ideas that God wants us to exercise, and then you try to live it alone. But the thing is if you try to live it alone, you're going to engage in what is a monologue, a conversation with
Mhm.
just yourself. And one of the most dangerous places that the enemy can work is in isolation, when in the echoes of your human heart, you can actually create justifications for all of your, reasons for the things that you do, the things that you do. And so what we actually need is to move from monologue to dialogue. We need
Mhm.
to have conversation partners, and the Holy Spirit is often working directly, with us and in us. And the way that the Holy Spirit often works is through His Word and
Mhm.
through His people. And so it's like community is massive. How
Mhm.
how do you stay sensitive? I don't know about you, but the people that are the closest to me, they can also, man, they can make me so upset so fast because they
Mhm.
really know me, And so one of the dangers for me is when I start to separate from them. Because if I try to separate from them, it's
Mhm.
actually an indication that I'm trying to take control over my own life. I'm not trying to hear what they have to say about
Wow.
my life,
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, no, I want to stay in relationship. I want to stay in community with them. I want to surround myself with people. Annie, I've got a group of guys that are just my dear friends. We've known each other since we were little kids. And you know what? They're the most unimpressed with me. They could care less what I do.
Yeah.
They're like, you wrote a book? Did anybody read that? Like, why would they, like they're like, what? Like, you're just Joey from Chicago. Like, what are we being serious right now? Like, when's the next time we're gonna go watch a basketball game and eat pizza? Like, that's and that is so refreshing, and that is so good for my soul. And I would just encourage y'all, man, surround yourself with some people that are so unimpressed with you, that they love you for just who you are. And Ben Rector has this song, "You Can't Make Old Friends," that whole thing about old friends. And
Yeah.
there's a part of that I just think is so true. Like, it's the type of people that you get around with and you just laugh at the same old jokes, and you just retell the same old jokes and you just laugh about them. Well, this is how you stay sensitive. Actually, humility and humor go hand in hand together, the ability to just laugh. to
At
laugh
yourself
at
too.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not in a
Yeah.
humiliating kind of way, but just in an honest kind of way. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, that was a failure. That was an epic fail on my part. Like, and just
Yes.
laugh, man. Just laugh about it. And so I think that's
That's
one of the things. And then the other thing too is at the very end of the book, I've got 13 devotions on how to cultivate humility. And I think one of the things that can happen for us is we can keep these thoughts. This is a struggle for me in the chambers of my brain. And a theology that is unlivable is completely unhelpful. And so humility, in essence, is a livable theology. It needs to be practiced. It needs to be lived out. And so at the end of the book, I've got these 13 devotions where you can kind of read them in 13 days or however you want to do it. But there is a consider section, a cultivate section, and then a commit section. And the commitment section is like the practical, here's what you do. So how do you stay sensitive? You get out there and you do it. You live it out, you exercise the muscle of humility. And so and I think the Circle 31 book club could be such a fun. In fact, the Circle 31 book club has a exclusive edition of the book, and I wasn't able to include it. Like, so if you go to Amazon and buy it, that's great, but you're not going to get an exclusive chapter. So only through the Proverbs 31 bookstore and through the Circle 31 book club, you're going to get an exclusive chapter that I wrote all about the heroic humility of women throughout history.
yes, women. We love that.
Yeah. So I think it's gonna be, and there's like a limited amount of copies with it, but
Yeah.
I'd love for your people to get it. I've
So
had
cool.
some people that have been like, I already bought the book, but I'm gonna go and get this one too because we need this chapter. I need this chapter.
No, it's so powerful. And Joel, you're amazing. There were so many moments in this conversation. I was like, oh my gosh, that was just for me. Seriously, just so grateful for your time, grateful for you pouring into this community. Where can people find you? And again, just reiterate where they can go sign up for the book club.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give Annie the link. So if you want to put it in the show notes, you can have it in there for sure. But you can find me. All my stuff is really on Instagram. So at my last name, Muddamalle. That's also my website is muddamalle.com. But most of my stuff is on Instagram. On Tuesdays, yesterday, I do a Theology Talk Tuesday where I try to answer as many theology questions as I possibly can. And then if you want to sign up for the book club, just go to circle31.org. Or it'll be linked in the show notes. And like I said, I am leading one of the grow groups, and the grow group that I'm leading is for the gal who is always worried about what other people think of them. Like if you just have that like fear of like, oh my gosh, what are they going to think? What are they going to do? Like, am I good enough? Then that's my fear. That's how I'm always like what I'm worried about. I think the 3-wing 2 thing absolutely plays into that. And so for that person, I'm excited to walk through how humility is a gift that's going to help you experience peace in the midst of all of that stress.
And just to edify you a little bit, you are an amazing teacher. You're brilliant. I think the best teachers are the ones that make it so simple. People like me can actually understand what you're teaching, and you're one of those. And so just grateful for all you do. Everybody's got to go be part of this book club because I know we all struggle with what do people think about me. And so Joel, just thank you for your time. Thank you for your ministry and pouring into people. It matters, and it's making a massive difference. So grateful for you.
Thank you so much, Annie.
And I hope that this blessed you and encouraged you, reminded you that God gave you a unique light, and it is your job to shine it in this world because we need you to. That being said, if you were blessed by this message and you can think of anybody else that also needs this type of encouragement, do me a favor, hit like, hit subscribe, leave me a comment. It helps me out a lot and helps this message that I do believe God gave my heart to share with the world gets out. I hope you have such an amazing rest of your day.